Everyone in the open plan lab stopped what they were doing when she spoke. Her voice carried like a scalpel through glass. You are no longer needed, Lena. Your role is being dissolved effective immediately. I sat at my desk, surrounded by monitors still running simulations on protein binding failures. Nadine Crane stood over me, lips painted in corporate red, eyes devoid of empathy. She spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. I noticed people trying not to look. But they all heard it. They always did. You have until 5 p.m. to gather your belongings. Human Resources has your exit paperwork ready. You will not be returning tomorrow, Nadine added, her tone clipped and final. I did not cry. I did not even flinch. I simply looked up and said, fine. Fire me. She faltered for half a second. That was not the reaction she had prepared for. She wanted shame. Pleading. Not calm indifference. She walked away briskly, her heels hitting the marble floor like gunshots. What she did not know was that I was not just another research analyst. I was Lena Caldwell, daughter of Jonathan Caldwell and majority shareholder of the company Nadine believed she had conquered. I owned 79% of Caldwell Biogen, the coastal biotech firm my grandfather started in a wooden barn behind our home in Newport, Maine. For 3 years, I had worked within this company under a different name, with a different hairstyle and a forged background. I did not want power without knowledge. I wanted to see what had changed after my father died. I wanted to know if the board had made a mistake when they appointed Nadine as CEO instead of trusting me with the legacy my family had built for over 4 decades. What I saw horrified me. Caldwell Biogen had once been the pride of the East Coast, a company that balanced innovation with ethics, delivering affordable cancer therapies without cutting corners. But Nadine, with her polished degrees and Wall Street sponsors, had drained its soul. She prioritized stock performance over patient outcomes. She fired scientists for speaking up. She outsourced lab work to underregulated facilities overseas. And now she was planning a merger with Helixer Labs, a foreign entity known more for acquisitions than discoveries. I had kept silent. I had documented everything. My experiment in invisibility was almost over, but Nadine had forced my hand. I was not supposed to reveal myself until spring, but she had humiliated me publicly, thinking she had erased another number from her spreadsheet. She had no idea she had just sparked a war. That afternoon, I packed my things with steady hands. A plant I had never watered, a few notebooks filled with annotations, and the security badge clipped with my mother's maiden name. I saw Thomas Reed watching me from the legal division, one of the 3 people who still knew who I was. Everything all right? He asked, walking over casually. No, I said calmly. But it will be. He lowered his voice. She moved the quarterly strategy meeting. It is happening tomorrow morning. 9 sharp. She plans to announce the Helixer merger and the closure of the research tower. I stopped. The Newport Tower? Thomas nodded. The entire East Wing. 127 jobs. Gone. That was my father's building. The place where he tested the molecule that would become Curivanol, the drug that saved thousands. My mother used to pack us sandwiches and drive us to that lab when I was little. That building was part of our family. Now Nadine wanted it gone, just a footnote in her campaign to inflate shareholder returns. As I stepped out of the building, the autumn wind whipped across the shoreline. The biotech campus overlooked the Atlantic Ocean, a symbol of how far we had come from barnyard experiments to world-class science. I stood in that wind, not as Lena Daniels, research analyst, but as Lena Caldwell, heir to an empire under siege. That night, I opened the file titled Initiate Contingency. It was a plan I had built in secret, a blueprint to retake what was rightfully ours. It contained every breach, every manipulated report, every employee terminated for protecting patients. I had every document I needed, every email, every audit trail. My father once told me we do not build companies. We build legacies. And those must be protected. At 6 a.m., I put on a navy blue suit, one my father had tailored for me before he passed. I pinned his old company pin onto my lapel and headed for the elevator that only executives could access. This time, I would not be invisible. This time, I would take my seat at the table. And this time, I would not be alone. The real meeting was just beginning. The executive elevator smelled like cold steel and silence. A place where decisions worth millions had been made with nothing more than a nod. As it climbed toward the top floor of Caldwell Biogen, my reflection stared back from the brushed metal doors, familiar but different. I was no longer Lena Daniels, the quiet analyst from Data Wing C. I was Lena Caldwell, daughter of Jonathan Caldwell, majority shareholder, and ghost of a legacy Nadine thought she had buried. The elevator chimed softly. Floor 24. The boardroom was just past the frosted glass corridor, its view overlooking the slate-gray Atlantic. I could already hear Nadine's voice inside, polished and poised as always. "We stand on the edge of exponential growth," she said. "The Helixer partnership will allow us to scale without the burden of bloated in-house research, streamlined production, optimized returns." I waited, just long enough for her to feel secure. Then I pushed the door open. A dozen heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. Franklin Shore, the oldest board member and a close friend of my late father, blinked slowly as if seeing a ghost. Nadine's expression did not change at first. Then she stiffened. "Excuse me," she said, her voice still smooth. "This is a closed session. Security will." "Franklin," I interrupted, not taking my eyes off her. "You recognize me, don't you? Lena?" His voice cracked slightly. "Good Lord." I walked to the center of the room and set my tablet case on the marble table. Nadine's hand hovered near the intercom. "I am sorry, but this is highly inappropriate," she began, but I cut her off. Inappropriate is discussing a merger without full board review. Inappropriate is terminating key personnel while hiding clinical trial failures. Inappropriate is selling off legacy assets that do not belong to you. She stepped back slightly. "You have no right to be here." "I have 79% voting rights in this company," I replied calmly. "I have every right to be here." There was a long silence. "You're Lena Caldwell?" one of the newer board members asked, stunned. I nodded. "And for the past 3 years, I have watched this company from the inside. What I've seen, what I've documented, is a betrayal of everything Caldwell Biogen was built upon." Nadine forced a smile. "This is a misunderstanding. Ms. Caldwell, surely we can discuss this." "I am not here to discuss," I said, sliding a document across the table. "This is a motion of no confidence. And as majority shareholder, I am calling for your immediate removal as Chief Executive Officer." The words struck like thunder. Franklin picked up the paper, eyes scanning the legal provisions. "You do not have the authority," Nadine snapped. "The board appointed me. The bylaws state." "Article 9, I said firmly. "Emergency override powers may be invoked by any shareholder holding more than 75% equity if the executive has endangered company assets or integrity without board approval." Thomas Reed entered the room then, nodding politely. "I have already reviewed the clause. It holds." Nadine looked like she had swallowed glass. "You have fabricated this entire stunt," she said bitterly. "You disappeared from this company. You gave up your place. Your father never intended you to lead. Is that what he told you?" I asked softly. Franklin stood. "Jonathan told me something very different. He said Lena had more integrity in her silence than most leaders do with a microphone." Nadine's jaw tightened. She turned to the others. "You cannot seriously consider this. We are about to finalize the Helixer deal. There is momentum, there is capital. We are making progress. At what cost?" I said, unlocking my tablet and connecting to the projector. The screen behind me lit up with timelines, figures, redacted contracts, and internal messages. Here is the real story. 2 clinical trials terminated due to safety concerns. Budget cuts that compromised efficacy review. Outsourcing facilities that failed inspection twice. You buried these, Nadine. You fired the people who tried to speak up. And now you want to merge with Helixer, a company with 3 active investigations for patent laundering. The boardroom was dead quiet. One of Nadine's loyalists tried to interject. We were told those issues were minor. Because she lied, I said sharply. And I have every email, every meeting record to prove it. Franklin sat back, his face pale. This is overwhelming. Take your time, I said. I brought printed copies. Nadine's lips curled. You waited 3 years to do this? I wanted to believe she would evolve, I answered. But some people are here to lead. Others are here to consume. Her face hardened. Even if you do this, the Helixer deal is already in motion. It is not approved. No signatures have been ratified. No regulatory bodies have been notified. Not yet. She opened her mouth again, but before she could speak, the boardroom door opened. And someone unexpected walked in. It was Jerome Clay, managing partner of the very law firm Nadine claimed now represented Caldwell Biogen. Good morning, he said calmly. Forgive the intrusion, but I believe there is something the board needs to see. And just like that, the final thread in Nadine's illusion began to unravel. All eyes shifted to Jerome Clay as he stepped fully into the room, his polished shoes silent on the marble floor. He carried a leather portfolio and the kind of presence that made the air thinner. Even Nadine froze, her usual confidence cracking at the edges. You have no right to be here, she said, her voice strained. Jerome gave her a courteous nod. Actually, Ms. Crane, I was invited by the rightful majority shareholder of this company. He placed the portfolio on the table and opened it slowly. Collins and Clay has represented Caldwell Biogen's legal interests for over 22 years. Last month, however, Ms. Crane submitted documentation indicating the firm had been replaced. He looked at the board. I am here to clarify that the termination letter was fraudulent. The signature from our founding partner was forged. The room went still. Nadine's supporters shifted uneasily. One man near the end of the table looked as if he wanted to vanish. Jerome continued, furthermore, the firm listed as our replacement, Stonebridge Partners, has never engaged in corporate representation. 2 individuals claiming to be from Stonebridge entered this building earlier today, but neither are licensed attorneys. Nadine's voice broke through the silence. This is absurd. They were temporary consultants. We needed agility to move the merger process along. Agility is not a legal defense, I replied, stepping closer. You attempted to invalidate the board's oversight by pretending the company's legal counsel had changed, without approval, without vote, and with falsified documents. Thomas, standing by the projection controls, added, the internal change of counsel form was backdated. The metadata shows it was edited only 2 days ago, not last month as claimed. You are twisting everything, Nadine snapped. This is a personal attack. She is using her inheritance to settle a vendetta. No, Franklin said from the end of the table, his voice like steel. She is using facts. Something this board has not seen in a long time. I turned to Jerome. Is there legal ground to halt the Helixer merger entirely? Absolutely, he replied. Since no binding agreement was signed and no board vote was conducted, any attempt to proceed without authorization would constitute fraud. If Helixer acts on it, they would be complicit. Nadine looked around, searching for backup, but her allies sat silent, reading the files I had handed out. No one would meet her eyes. She took a step back. You do not understand what you are doing. Helixer will sue. Investors will panic. The press will eat this alive. And we will tell them the truth, I said. That a corrupt executive was removed before irreversible damage was done. I clicked to the next slide. It displayed a chart showing a sharp spike in insider stock sales over the last 4 months. Most of them traced back to Nadine's inner circle. Profit at any cost, I said. That was your real mission, was it not? Her last card was anger. You would rather see this company burn than let it evolve, she hissed. Your father built a garage empire, but I was the one who brought it into the 21st century. I made it leaner, faster. You made it weaker, I replied. Less ethical, less human. Franklin rose to his feet. I believe we have seen enough. As acting chairman, I moved to vote on the motion of no confidence in Nadine Crane. I second it, said Naomi Fields, head of marketing, who had until now remained silent. The vote passed, with only one abstention. Nadine was finished. But she was not going quietly. She slammed her hand on the table, scattering some of the papers. You think this is over, she growled. There are already operational changes in place. Facilities marked for shutdown. Research teams disbanded. Clinical trials halted. You cannot reverse that overnight. Maybe not overnight, I said. But I do not need overnight. I need truth. And a team that remembers why this company existed in the first place. Just then, the security detail arrived, briefed silently by Thomas. They waited respectfully by the door. I will walk out when I am ready. Nadine barked at them. No, I said. You will walk out now. She looked at me, truly looked at me for the first time. No mask, no power, just rage. But even that was crumbling. As she left, escorted through the same glass hallway where she had once humiliated so many others, I took my place at the head of the boardroom table. The chair was unfamiliar, sterile, changed since my father's time. But the weight of the legacy? That felt the same. Thomas leaned over and said quietly, You just saved this company. I shook my head. Not yet. Because outside that room, hundreds of employees still had no idea what was happening. Facilities were still facing closure. A false narrative was already spiraling, and unless I acted quickly, Nadine's damage would write its own ending. The real battle was about to begin. By 7:30 the next morning, the glass atrium of Caldwell Biogen buzzed with tension. Word had traveled fast. Employees from every floor filled the main auditorium, their faces tight with anxiety, some whispering theories, others just watching the doors. Nadine had scheduled a company-wide meeting to announce her strategic optimization plan. Everyone expected layoffs. No one knew just how much had already changed overnight. I stood behind the stage curtain, adjusting the pin on my lapel, the same one my father wore when he announced our first national cancer trial nearly 2 decades ago. This moment was no different. It required bravery. It demanded clarity. Naomi Fields approached from the side, her tablet in hand. They are ready for you, she said gently. Her voice trembled slightly, not with fear, but relief. Let us give them what Nadine never could, I whispered. The truth. The lights dimmed. The company logo flashed across the wall. I stepped out into a silence so heavy it felt physical. Dozens of employees looked up in shock. Some recognized me instantly. Others only saw a stranger in a navy suit walking where Nadine should have stood. I took the podium and spoke without slides. Just words. Good morning. My name is Lena Caldwell. Some of you knew me as Lena Daniels from Research Analytics. For the last 3 years, I have worked quietly beside you. I have reviewed trial data with you. I have eaten in the cafeteria with you. I have stood in the freezing parking lot after shift changes with you. And for those 3 years, I have watched something quietly rot at the core of this company. A gasp rippled across the crowd. Faces leaned forward. I stayed silent because I needed to be sure. I needed to see with my own eyes how the culture my father built, one of transparency, collaboration, and care, had been twisted into something unrecognizable. What I saw were layoffs masked as efficiency, science treated like currency, and ethics dismissed as obstacles. But what hurt most was watching talented people like you treated like liabilities instead of the reason this company exists. I paused, scanned the room. Even the technicians standing by the doors were still. Yesterday, Nadine Crane fired me. She believed I was just a middle-tier analyst who asked too many questions. What she did not know is that I am the majority shareholder of Caldwell Biogen. And this morning, she was removed as Chief Executive Officer. The silence broke like a wave. Some gasped. Others clapped. A few just blinked, unsure what to believe. I continued. There will be no merger with Helixer Labs. There will be no closure of the Newport facility. There will be no outsourcing of our research teams. Relief, disbelief, then cautious joy spread like color returning to a faded painting. In the next 30 days, we will be conducting a full internal audit. Not to punish, but to understand what was lost and what must be restored. Department leaders will meet with me directly. We will reinstate disbanded teams where possible. Research projects shelved for the wrong reasons will be reopened. If you were demoted or dismissed unfairly and wish to return, we will talk. Applause built slowly, then swelled. It echoed through the atrium like thunder under glass. And something else, I added. We are creating a new permanent position on our board, Director of Employee Advocacy. Someone who will sit at the same table as the executives and represent your voices in every major decision. This company cannot be rebuilt from the top down. It has to be rebuilt with all of you. Tears welled in a few eyes. One of the senior lab techs, a man who had nearly retired last year, but stayed to finish one final trial, stood and clapped with both hands raised. I finished with what I needed them to know. I cannot promise we will be perfect, but I can promise you this. We will never again value numbers over people. Our name is Caldwell. And starting today, we remember what that means. When the meeting ended, they did not rush out like usual. They stayed. Dozens came forward, shaking my hand, hugging each other. Some laughed. Others simply said, "Thank you." But one moment stayed with me. A young intern approached me timidly, barely 20, holding a notebook tight against her chest. Her voice cracked as she said, "I thought I did something wrong. I thought I was the problem." I looked her in the eyes and replied, "You were never the problem. You were the reason I came back." Later that day, security escorted Nadine through the front lobby. Her suit was pristine, her hair perfect, but her eyes were hollow. She had not spoken since the board vote. As she walked past the security checkpoint, she glanced back once. Our eyes met. "You will not last," she said quietly, a bitter edge in her voice. The market does not care about integrity. It cares about growth. Sustainable growth comes from trust, I answered. Something you never understood. Her car pulled away. I turned back toward the elevator, not to return to an office, but to begin the real work. Because cleaning up her mess was only the beginning. And somewhere, deeper in the system, I knew the damage was still spreading. The sun had barely touched the windows the next morning when Thomas Reed entered my office with a folder and a face that warned of another storm brewing. "We found something," he said, placing the folder gently on the glass desk. Something she tried to bury. I opened it slowly. At first glance, the contents looked like standard internal memos, meeting notes, adjusted trial schedules, budget reallocations. But Thomas tapped a page near the bottom. This one. It was a communication between Nadine and a man named Marcus Felt, a consultant listed under a shell company called Red River Analysis. He had been brought on 18 months ago. His purpose, as described vaguely in the contract, was data streamlining for international compliance. I frowned. "We do not have international operations." "Not officially," Thomas said. But according to this, he was paid to normalize clinical performance reports for off-site regulatory preview. That means she was laundering trial data through an external lab. And not just any data, trial phase 3 results for our cancer immunotherapy line. I closed the folder slowly, my stomach dropping. Phase 3 was critical. It was the line between experimental and market-ready. We were dealing with real patients now. Real risks. She falsified the results, I said, almost to myself. Or masked them just enough to keep investor confidence high, Thomas replied grimly. This was more than corporate mismanagement. This was fraud, possibly criminal. And if any patient was harmed by decisions made based on these skewed reports, it would be a disaster not just for the company, but for everything my father built. I called an emergency executive session. The remaining leadership team gathered in the strategy room, a sleek space lined with cold screens and hot coffee none of us touched. Naomi, Franklin, our finance head Drew Vaughn, and our chief scientific officer, Dr. Eliza Harrow. Eliza's hands trembled as she read the reports. She risked patient safety, she whispered. For what? An uptick in quarterly profits. I looked at her. You worked on the Adrian trials, yes? Yes, she said, nodding. I was one of 3 leads. We were told last year that Trial 2 data would be integrated with international analysis. I suspected discrepancies, but Nadine said it was a platform compatibility issue. She even showed me doctored analytics that looked clean. I could see the weight of her guilt on her face. She had not failed. She had been manipulated. Like so many others. We need to verify everything, I said. Every number, every patient record, every adverse event that was brushed aside. If there is even one trace of harm caused by falsified data, we notify the authorities ourselves. Before the media gets to it. Franklin nodded. And what about Red River? This Marcus Velt. Thomas leaned forward. We traced the payment structure. Red River is tied to 3 other shell corporations, one of which is owned in part by Helixer Labs. The room fell silent. Are you saying, Naomi began slowly, that Nadine was not just merging with Helixer, she was funneling intellectual property to them in advance? Looks that way, Thomas replied. Trial data, patient response metrics, even algorithmic forecasts. All filtered through third parties designed to muddy the trail. It was espionage, plain and simple, disguised beneath layers of corporate jargon and plausible deniability. And now it was our mess to clean up. We need to bring in outside investigators, I said. Not just legal, ethical, transparent. We will disclose everything to the board first, then prepare a controlled press statement. If we wait, if we even look like we are hiding, it will burn everything. Drew spoke up for the first time. There is another issue. Helixer Labs filed a public statement this morning. They are claiming that the merger was in late-stage authorization and that any disruption is a breach of strategic agreement. They are bluffing, Thomas said. Maybe, Drew replied. But their wording is deliberate. They are baiting the press. They want us to flinch. Eliza stood slowly. Let them talk. Let them throw every shadow they have. Because once we show the world the truth, once we expose how Nadine hollowed this place out and tried to sell its bones, they will not have a merger. They will have a scandal. I looked around the room and saw something I had not seen in years. Unity. Not from fear. Not from profit incentives. But from shared purpose. All right, I said. We bring in an ethics council, a clinical review board, and data forensics. Lock down all remaining systems. Cross-reference every trial report Nadine touched. We bring in every employee she fired, if they are willing, and we hear what they have to say. And what about Nadine herself? Naomi asked. She will not go quietly. She already has a lawyer, Thomas confirmed. But she has no documents, no systems access, and no allies left here. And once Helixer realizes they were being used too, she will be alone. Still, I could not shake the feeling in my chest. Because Nadine was clever. And the deeper we dug into her trail, the more I began to suspect something even worse than fraud. Something still waiting beneath the surface. And it had not revealed itself yet. The wind off the Atlantic howled against the windows that night as I sat alone in the data review room, the blue glow of encrypted logs reflecting off every screen. Lines of code, emails, backups, and audit trails scrolled endlessly before me. Somewhere in the digital haystack Nadine had left behind, there had to be more. Something we had not seen yet. My instincts would not rest. Thomas had gone home hours earlier, reluctantly. Eliza had stayed the longest, re-verifying patient IDs and adverse event timelines. Naomi had sent me a message just an hour ago. Do not forget to breathe, she wrote. I tried. Then a flagged folder blinked on screen. Hidden beneath a generic file labeled Archived Budget Requests was a subfolder marked with a simple string, 4723 LK. I opened it. Inside were 15 documents. At first glance, they looked like travel receipts and staff scheduling adjustments, innocuous. But one caught my eye. A plain text file with no title. I clicked. What appeared was a letter, dated 3 months ago, from Nadine. But it was not addressed to anyone inside Caldwell Biogen. It was a private message, written to someone called Dr. Levon Kovacs, a known figure in the Helixer Labs Shadow Division. The message was blunt, more than just corporate. If the board moves too slow, I will create the necessary chaos, she wrote. Once I have majority authority transferred through the proxy board, we proceed with Phase 2. The Seattle model will apply. Lena Caldwell is not a threat. She is emotionally tethered and easily discredited. She will never see it coming. I stared at those words, my heart slowing. The Seattle model. I had read about that years ago. A smaller biotech firm gutted in stages after a hostile takeover. Assets shifted through secondary markets, trials absorbed, patents refiled under new foreign subsidiaries. The original founders were left with nothing but a name. Phase 2 was not a merger. It was a dismantling. I scrolled down and found attachments. One showed a list of assets marked for redistribution, including our core compound data, digital trial signatures, and licensing rights for a new cancer immunotherapy line codenamed Cervax. Another listed names, internal employees targeted for isolation, demotion, or dismissal. Half of them had already been let go. The other half? Still here. Still at risk. I leaned back in my chair, a sick realization tightening in my chest. Nadine had not just been siphoning company assets for profit. She had mapped a blueprint for Caldwell Biogen's quiet erasure. And I had almost let her finish it. I printed the letter. I needed the team to see it in the morning. But something kept nagging at me. Why had she been so confident? Why did she believe she had majority authority through the proxy board? That phrase made no sense unless she had forged proxy votes. I paged Thomas. He answered groggily. I need you in the office, I said. Now. I think Nadine filed fraudulent shareholder proxies under temporary accounts. You are sure? I am sure enough not to sleep. By the time he arrived, I had already pulled the shareholder registry and was cross-referencing proxy agreements. What we found was worse than I had imagined. 12 proxy forms had been submitted in the past 90 days, anonymous holders supposedly transferring temporary voting power to the executive suite for expedited governance. They bore digital signatures, but all originated from the same IP address. Nadine's former assistant. Thomas exhaled slowly. If she used those votes during any board decision, it invalidates everything that happened under their approval. She created shadow votes, I said, to tip every resolution in her favor. That includes the Red River contracts, Thomas said. The Helixer pre-authorization drafts, even the legal counsel switch. It was never a divided board, I murmured. It was a hijacked one. We logged everything, backed up every document. Then we paged Franklin, Eliza, and Naomi. By sunrise, they had joined us in the strategy room again, red-eyed and stone-faced. Franklin set his cane against the wall and read the letter in silence. When he finished, he looked at me. She was never here to lead, he said. She was here to erase us. Then we expose everything, I said. Publicly. Naomi hesitated. We will lose investors. Then we rebuild with ones who value truth. Eliza's voice was steady. I would rather be broke than silent. We drafted the statement together. By noon, it would be sent to every employee, investor, and regulator. We would not hide Nadine's crimes. We would shine a spotlight on them. But before we could send it, Thomas pulled me aside with a concerned look. We just received a cease and desist, he said, handing me a document. From Nadine's private counsel. I skimmed it. The language was hostile. Aggressive. She was threatening to sue for character defamation, breach of executive privilege, and unlawful possession of protected communications. I looked at Thomas. Does she have a leg to stand on? He shook his head. No. But she is not trying to win. She is trying to delay. If she stalls the release of this statement, she can file her own version of the story first. She is setting fire to the narrative, I said, and hoping it burns before the truth gets out. We were running out of time. I stepped back into the boardroom and picked up the phone. Get me the press. Get me the regulators. Get me every voice that matters. Because Nadine Crane had lit the match. And now I had to make sure the fire revealed her before it consumed everything else. The cameras were already rolling when I stepped onto the stage. A wave of flashes struck my face, followed by a hush so sharp it seemed to slice through the tension in the air. The room was packed: journalists, analysts, employees, even rival executives from companies I had not seen in years. We had called the emergency press conference for noon. It was now 12:02. No teleprompter. No handlers. Just the truth. My name is Lena Caldwell, I began. And I am here to tell you a story about deception, silence, and the power of exposure. I walked them through it carefully: Nadine's appointment, the shift in culture, the dismissals, the fabricated clinical reports, the fake proxy votes, and the stolen research. I read direct excerpts from her message to Dr. Levankovics. I displayed the false shareholder forms. I even played a short clip of audio taken during her private boardroom strategy sessions, cold, calculated directives that showed her intent to dissolve our core assets and vanish behind a merger. Gasps rippled through the room. I let them settle before continuing. What you have just seen is not just corporate mismanagement. It is the dismantling of a legacy through manipulation, forgery, and the betrayal of patients and professionals alike. Then I did something unusual. I invited 3 employees on stage with me: a lab technician, a clinical trial coordinator, and a former administrative assistant, all of whom had been terminated under Nadine's restructuring. Each of them told their story. Brief. Powerful. I was told to delete trial flags from the summary reports. I was told to ignore a lab warning from our India partner lab. I was told never to forward internal emails to the board again. The room fell silent. Then I returned to the microphone. This is not about vengeance. It is about accountability. This morning, Caldwell Biogen filed a formal request with the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Health to open joint investigations into every contract, data trail, and executive decision made under Nadine Crane's leadership. We will cooperate fully. And we will not hide behind our lawyers. Not now. Not ever. Applause erupted, not thunderous, but stunned and solemn. Then I delivered the line I had waited months to speak. Caldwell Biogen will not be sold. It will not be swallowed. It will not be erased. We are not here for quarterly applause. We are here to save lives. And that starts with saving our soul. When I left the stage, Naomi handed me a folded piece of paper. She was pale. It came during the conference, she said. The letter was from Nadine's attorneys. They were threatening an injunction to freeze our assets, claiming that my statements constituted executive slander and financial destabilization. They were also claiming, bizarrely, that I had used unauthorized spyware to gain access to her private communications. I blinked. She is trying to flip the narrative, Thomas muttered, reading over my shoulder. Classic tactic. If she can get a judge to even consider the injunction, it freezes all our capital accounts. No salaries. No payouts. No progress. Do we have legal exposure? No. But that might not matter. The fear alone could rattle investors. We were walking straight into her trap. She had filed this knowing we would go public. It was retaliation, disguised as legal maneuvering. She is going to try and make us look unstable, Naomi said. Like this whole thing was an emotional crusade instead of a corporate reckoning. She is going to hope our people get scared, Eliza added. And jump ship. Not yet, I thought. I was not finished. We needed to act. Loudly. Decisively. Set up a second press release, I said. But this time, bring in the clinical data reviewers. Show the chart paths. Show the patient-side impact. We will let the numbers speak louder than the outrage. And what about the injunction? We challenge it. Publicly. But that could escalate things, Thomas warned. Good, I replied. Let her escalate. Let her throw everything she has left. Because every time she swings, she exposes herself. But I knew this would not be her last move. Sure enough, that evening, something strange happened. All access to our archive servers went offline. Every digital copy of the clinical trial chain vanished for 36 minutes, then reappeared. Unedited. Unaffected. But that gap was too precise. Too surgical. Thomas called me immediately. Someone tried to breach the system, he said. And failed. Failed how? He hesitated. Because we were expecting it. We left bait. We had laid a honeypot, an isolated copy of sensitive but falsified data designed to detect unauthorized access. It worked. We traced the access ping to an external node in Luxembourg, a known server bank previously tied to Helixer Labs' off-site mirror facilities. I felt the blood in my veins go cold. She is not finished, I said. She is going global. Because Nadine had failed to burn us down from the inside. Now she was going to try from the outside. And the storm was only getting louder. By sunrise, the legal team had confirmed it. Our bait server had not just been accessed, it had been cloned. Line by line, byte by byte, the false clinical data we had isolated had been siphoned through an offshore proxy and re-uploaded to a medical research forum under a fake institute name, Covix Research Alliance. It was a name that had not appeared in formal journals for nearly a decade. Until now. Eliza slammed her tablet onto the boardroom table. They are going to use falsified data to get ahead of our findings. If they publish it before we can issue a retraction, they can discredit us before we even reveal the real trials, Naomi added, pacing. Franklin leaned forward, hands steepled beneath his chin. It is not just theft. It is positioning. They are trying to launch our own product under a foreign patent. It was a move that had only worked once before, and barely, what was now known in corporate lore as the Anderson collapse, when a Canadian pharmaceutical startup lost their IP overnight to a Hong Kong firm through strategic data laundering and legal redirection. The damage had taken years to reverse. Nadine was not just hiding. She was executing a playbook. I turned to Thomas. Can we prove the data they leaked came from our honeypot? Yes, he replied without hesitation. We embedded a tracer code into the metadata. It is invisible to end users, but unique to our environment. If they use it publicly, we can tie it back to them. Then that is our counter, I said. Let them step into the light first. When they do, we reveal the tracer and expose their entire operation. Naomi raised an eyebrow. You are gambling that they will be arrogant enough to publish. They are desperate, I said. They need a win. They will not wait. 2 hours later, the gamble paid off. Covix Research Alliance announced, with sudden fanfare, a breakthrough oncology dataset for a compound nearly identical to our own Cervax for an immunotherapy trial. The press release used eerily similar phrasing to our own internal reports, even referencing structural enzyme reactions that had only appeared in our version of the Phase 3 simulations. They were moving fast. Too fast. We launched our counterstrike. An emergency live stream went live from our media room. This time, no employees. No board members. Just Thomas, Eliza, and me. I held up the printed metadata sequence. This string, I said, pointing to the code, was placed into a secure simulation environment 4 days ago. It is not real trial data. It is a decoy, planted deliberately to identify unauthorized access. And now, that exact string, our digital fingerprint, has appeared in Covix Research Alliance's published release. I looked straight into the lens. This is scientific theft. It is fraud. And it is the second act in a multinational attack on truth in medicine. Eliza followed with a full technical breakdown, how the decoy differed from real trials, how no legitimate lab could have produced it, and how the sudden appearance of such a complete dataset with no verified testing history was statistically impossible. Within minutes, the press exploded. By afternoon, global headlines read, "Pharma giant traps data thieves in corporate sting operation. Caldwell Biogen outsmarts global IP raid with surgical precision. Covax alliance under fire after traced data leak." And just like that, the tide shifted. Shareholder confidence rebounded. Former employees flooded our inboxes with offers to return. Even legacy competitors sent private messages of support. The power of transparency had done what brute legal force could not. But Nadine still had one card left. Thomas received an encrypted message through our whistleblower portal late that night. It had no sender, no subject. Just a voice recording. Nadine's voice. "You think this is about patents?" she said, her voice low, calm. "You still do not understand. Cervax was just one weapon. Caldwell Biogen's vault holds 5 more. None of them protected. None of them safe." Then static. And silence. I stared at the speaker in disbelief. She had more. "What vault?" Naomi asked. "We do not have any." But Thomas was already pulling up our internal registry. There it was. Codeline Vega. A project folder locked behind multiple layers of encryption. Last accessed 2 years ago. Original permissions granted by former board members, 3 of whom had resigned right after Nadine was appointed. Eliza's face went pale. "That is our neural-linked pathogen response program. It was experimental. Still in biomodeling phase. We shelved it for ethical review. And Nadine unshelved it without telling anyone," I said. She planned to sell not just one weapon. She planned to sell the whole future. It was not over. She was not done. And the vault door was already creaking open. The night the vault was unlocked, the cold wasn't just in the air, it was in the silence that fell over the team as the first lines of code appeared on our monitors. Codeline Vega wasn't a research file. It was a full platform. An experimental framework designed to respond to mutating pathogens in real time using neural-linked biofeedback. The tech was raw, dangerous, and a decade ahead of anything the public knew existed. Franklin Shore, who had been quiet since the exposure of the Covax leak, stepped closer to the screen and rubbed his temples. "I remember this. It was supposed to be a medical response system for immunovolatile strains. The problem was, it learned too fast." Naomi looked over. "What do you mean too fast?" "It adapted in ways we couldn't predict," he said. "When we simulated a viral outbreak, the system started designing countermeasures before we even finished the sequence. But then it began altering its own parameters. Self-mutating defenses. The ethical board called it rogue coding." I stared at the lines blinking on the screen, my mind racing. And Nadine wanted to sell this? Eliza ran a trace on external access logs. She already tried. "Look at this." She pointed at 2 red pings. "These servers are in Reykjavik, Iceland. Military-grade encryption. One was a dark web biotech marketplace. The other? A shell company traced to a retired intelligence operative in Zurich." Thomas leaned forward. She wasn't just planning to leak the vault. She was trying to auction it off to private defense contractors. We had something volatile in our hands, something that could alter not just medicine, but warfare. I felt a chill that went far beyond the November wind whipping against the coastal windows of our biotech tower. "We need to shut it down," I said. But it wasn't that simple. Codeline Vega was more than a file. It had been running in isolated sandbox environments that Nadine had secretly built across redundant systems. Like a digital hydra, if we cut off one head, others would emerge. "We'll need a coordinated kill switch," Naomi said, already typing. "A chain reaction that burns every copy simultaneously, including the backups." Franklin hesitated. "If we do this wrong, we risk activating its defense protocols. It might try to replicate into new systems. Or worse, Trigger a remote upload to her buyers. Eliza stood. Then we need to trick it. We convince the AI that its mission has changed. We turn it inward. We built a cloaked simulation, a false terminal pretending to be Nadine's access point. We fed Codeline Vega a series of commands posing as final export instructions. Then, at the last second, we embedded a kill loop that would collapse every code string it tried to replicate. At midnight, we launched the protocol. The screens flickered. Data nodes began blinking out one by one. For 7 tense minutes, the room held its breath. Then silence. Every trace of Codeline Vega had vanished. No replication attempts. No remote access. No defense protocol. Just quiet. Is it over? Naomi whispered. Thomas didn't answer. He simply walked to the nearest server node, pulled the physical drive from its housing and crushed it beneath the heel of his boot. Then he looked at me. Now it is. But the silence didn't last long. The next morning, the Federal Cyber Division arrived. Apparently, our live stream had triggered more than media buzz. It had pinged red alerts across 3 agencies. Men in dark coats entered our lobby with sealed warrants and cold expressions. But they weren't here to arrest anyone. They were here with a message. We've been watching Nadine Crane for 18 months, one agent said in a low voice. You just gave us what we needed to make it public. She had triggered investigations in 5 countries. The sale of experimental AI-based medical platforms to third-party buyers wasn't just corporate sabotage. It was now being classified as biocyber terrorism. I asked the agent, "Do you know where she is?" He nodded. We do now. 2 hours later, a private jet registered to one of Nadine's shell firms was grounded at an abandoned airfield in Greenland. She wasn't on board. But a trail of financial transactions traced her to a hidden estate in the Faroe Islands, off the grid but not invisible anymore. For the first time in weeks, I sat in the quiet of my office and exhaled. The board was gone, the poison purged, the vault sealed, but the ache remained. This wasn't just about reclaiming my family's legacy. It was about preventing the future from being sold off, one algorithm at a time. Naomi knocked once and entered. The final audit is done. The staff wants to know what's next. I turned to the C. Tell them the company is ours again. And this time, we answer to the science, not the shareholders. Because truth, when buried beneath silence, always finds its way back to the surface. Winter had settled in over Newport like a hush, snow blanketing the coast in a white stillness that softened the sharp edges of the past. Inside Caldwell Biogen's coastal campus, light from the glass corridors spilled like gold onto the frozen ground below. Everything had changed, but the building still stood, not as a monument to ambition, but as a living testament to resilience. It had been 30 days since the takedown. Nadine Crane had been apprehended while trying to cross into international waters aboard a smuggler's vessel under a false identity. Her arrest had made headlines. But it wasn't the fall of a corrupt CEO that held the world's attention. It was what Caldwell Biogen did next. The press conference was held not in a boardroom, but in the main research atrium, where microscopes and monitors lined the open space and scientists in lab coats stood alongside community members. Cameras flashed. Questions flew. But I stepped forward, calm and certain. This company, I said, was built on trust. And that trust must be rebuilt from the lab bench up. The board had been dissolved. In its place, a new executive council was formed, half composed of lead researchers, half of community ethics liaisons. We created a transparency portal, an open access system that allowed independent oversight into every major decision regarding drug development and data use. We also announced a new initiative, the Atlas Pledge. Any technology derived from Vault research would be used only for nonprofit humanitarian purposes for the next 10 years. The pledge was signed live on camera by me, Naomi, Franklin, Thomas, and Eliza. Some called it bold. Others called it naive. I called it justice. But not everything had settled. Weeks later, as I walked through the lower archives, I found a sealed envelope tucked beneath a floor panel. My name was written on the front in my father's script. I opened it slowly. Inside was a letter. Short, direct. Lena, if you're reading this, it means you've found your own way to the truth. I always knew you would. The company was never meant to be about my legacy. It was about your future. Trust your instincts. And never let the noise of greed drown out the whisper of purpose. Jonathan. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. His words were the bridge between what had been stolen and what I now chose to build. A few weeks later, I stood on the balcony of the R&D tower as the snow turned to soft rain. Naomi joined me, a cup of coffee in her hands. They offered you the Global Tech Summit keynote, she said, her voice laced with disbelief. All three of them. I smiled faintly. I turned them down. Her eyes widened. Why? Because I have something better in mind. Instead of flying to Davos or Silicon Valley, I began a speaking tour, visiting underfunded biotech programs at public universities across the country. I shared everything, not just the breakthroughs, but the failures, the betrayals, the lessons. Students didn't need another idol. They needed proof that power could be reclaimed quietly, relentlessly, and with integrity intact. Back in Newport, Caldwell Biogen reopened its community clinic, offering experimental treatments free of charge to terminal patients who had no other options. One of our earliest patients was a 10-year-old boy with a rare neurological condition. He walked out of our doors a year later with a new lease on life. He sent us a drawing, stick figures holding hands under a giant tree labeled Hope. I framed it on the wall of my office. One evening, as I left the building, I paused outside the main doors and looked up at the etched glass above. Science serves humanity. Words my father had chosen decades ago. They finally meant something again. Because in the end, legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what you protect when no one else will. And mine was just beginning.